Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Jordan Rodriguez, and welcome to our webinar. We're going to give everyone just another minute to arrive and come into the room, and then we're going to get started. Okay. Hi, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Victoria. I work with the James Beard Foundation, and I am so excited to welcome you to our webinar today. So this is awkward, how to have uncomfortable conversations. This is being brought to all of you by our very, very wonderful partners at Capital One. Capital One is, for anybody who has not seen what the James Beard Foundation has been up to for the past year and a half, Capital One has been incredibly integral to our programming, to the James Beard Awards, to our Taste America program, and we're really excited to, in this webinar series, be able to leverage some of their professionals for all of you, our restaurant community, so that we can have some great conversations, however awkward they might be. Here's how the webinar is going to work today. You see a blue screen up right now. This webinar is being recorded, so we will send out a link to the recording after the program wraps. Any decks, any information that you see as part of this webinar will be there, so you'll be able to take a look at all of this again or share it with anyone who may have missed it. We're going to save questions for the end, as time allows. Please write in your questions at any time using the webinar tool. We'll also have a few breaks during the presentation to kind of relate it back to some restaurant topics, and then also to take any specific questions about that section. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please message us using the webinar toolbar, and we will do our very best to troubleshoot. These systems should all be working pretty well. We do get to do these pretty frequently, but there's always a couple of issues. So do let us know. We want to make sure that you're able to participate. Joining me today for the webinar are two HR professionals from Capital One, and that, of course, is Nicole Rossel and Tasha Smith, who are here today. We have a really exciting presentation for you, and we're just going to start with a little bit of an introduction. I have been working for the James Beard Foundation for over a decade, but for about almost 15 years before that, I had the great privilege of working in restaurants here in New Jersey, where I live, in New York City. Restaurant work has always been something that I've been very proud of. I learned so many lessons on how to interact with people, on how to give folks the right of way. But really the HR lessons that get learned are often learned on the job. And I think that a lot of folks who are listening today will agree that there is not generally an HR role in a restaurant, that often falls to a manager or an owner, somebody who's speaking to the staff or individuals, and that there's always room for improvement. So much of it is learned on the job, and you hope to have someone great that you're learning from in your first position, because often those are the ways that you take with you as you go to your next job. So what we want to do today is offer some 30,000-foot advice from our Capital One friends on how to have some of these difficult conversations in a better way, in a way that makes everybody feel valued, in a way that makes everybody feel respected, but still gets your point across in a direct way, and in a way that makes sure that either the manager to the employee conversation is going well, or quite frankly, the opposite of that. Sometimes it's an employee that needs to speak with their manager because they're having a particular issue. And we want to make sure that everybody is prepared for that. And honestly, this advice can transcend from a law firm to a bank, to a restaurant or cafe, really any place where you're working and you're deserving of that same respect while you're working, both ways. So without further ado, I am going to pass this off to our colleagues Tasha and Nicole to tell us more about these very difficult conversations and how best to have them. Nicole, Tasha?
Thank you, Victoria, and it's really great to be with you guys today. Thank you so much for having us. We really enjoy the partnership and are grateful to be here for another episode, right, of how we can help all of our employees, our customers, everyone just sort of work better as they're moving through their day and having those awkward but necessary, uncomfortable conversations. As Victoria said, my name is Tasha Smith. I am a part of the HR team here at Capital One. I have been with Capital One for 21 years, and over the last 17, held various HR roles, from recruiting to downsizing to training, and now specializing in employee relations, where I support our enterprise services functions. I am born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, which is also where I'm currently based. And so really enjoying some nice fall weather. My joke is that if you're on the East Coast like I am, we no longer have 4 seasons. I think we just have 2. It goes from being really, really hot to just being cold. And so really enjoying that and looking forward to spending time with you guys today. Nicole?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tasha, and thank you, Victoria. My name is Nicole Rossel. I'm already having technical issues, so I am really crossing my fingers that that is it for the rest of this cast. I've been part of Capital One for 10 years. I've been in the recruiting side for our retail branches. I did HR business partner work on the retail side, and then now I'm on the staff side. I think one of the things that Victoria kind of shared was kind of some of the issues and the difficult conversations that we have really span different industries. And so prior to my time in HR, I managed a radiology office and I managed an apartment complex. And so what I found is that in all of those situations, I had very similar issues and very similar difficult conversations. The audience just changed a bit. And so what we're hoping for today is to be able to share some tips and tricks to have some of these conversations, be prepared for some of these situations that you all can apply then to your particular situations. And so invite you all, if you have kind of more restaurant related that we're not getting to situations, please feel free to chime in, ask those questions, and we'll do our best to go ahead and get those answered for you all. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the James Beard Foundation. We've had a couple of meetings with them preparing for this. We've looked at the questions you guys submitted before the session and even this morning. So we're very hopeful that we'll cover most of the topics during our time today. So thank you for having us. With that, if we want to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start off at employee reviews. And we did see a lot of questions kind of come up on employee reviews. And so I'm going to start just more of a foundation. I think a lot of us hear employee reviews and we get super nervous. And what I like to talk to my leaders about is it's really intended to be a dialogue. It's a two-way conversation to be had. Yes, there is a large role for you as a manager or as you as an HR professional to provide an update in terms of how that particular individual is doing from a performance perspective, but you also want to hear from them. You want to hear what is going well, what isn't going so well, what are their struggles, what gets in their way. So make it a two-way dialogue. It'll take a little bit of the tension off of you, and it'll also give you insight into that particular individual so you know how to have the rest of the dialogue. The other piece is it formal or informal? A lot of organizations really go with something that's formal and that's documented, but it doesn't have to be. So what I would say is kind of work on what works best for you all. One of the things that Tasha and some of her colleagues have taught me through my time in HR is document, document, document. And so even if it is a more informal dialogue that you have from an employee review perspective, document the conversation. Take some notes in terms of what happened, what questions came up, how did you answer, and really keep that into a log or a confidential file. In case any questions come up, you can use that as a reference point. What I would say is, Tasha and I, the work that we do is kind of really on the staff side. And so we tend to have employee reviews once a year. But I do know that our retail branches and in different industries that I've worked at, it's more on a quarterly basis. A lot happens. You all are managing through a lot in the restaurant industry. There's a lot that's coming at you. So kind of remembering everything that happens for a year is even tougher than it is for us in more staff functions. And so build the process into something that really works for you all. So if it's on a quarterly basis and you're getting quarterly metrics that are coming in, use that time to have an employee review conversation. Tasha, I have shared a lot here. Any thoughts or tips and tricks that you want to add to the mix?
Yes, absolutely. I think, employee reviews can be difficult. They don't have to be. I think when it comes down to whether or not it's formal or informal really just depends on the environment, the situation, the relationship between you and the employee. But the key thing is just having a conversation. I will often say for our folks that, hey, people are people regardless of the industry or the situation, and people can't fix what they don't know. And so it's just important to give that feedback, help them understand what things could be improved upon, because everybody comes into the situation wanting to be their best self. So I would definitely kind of make sure that you figure out how to have the conversation and do so in a way that just kind of helps build their relationship and helps the employee improve themselves. From a documentation perspective, yes, that definitely is my mantra. Document, document, document. But again, does not have to be overly formal, right? As long as it's something that you can refer back to if needed, right? Everyone sometimes has a different recollection of conversations. You may have to refer back to things that happened earlier in the year. So even if it's just an email to yourself, you jot something on a sticky note and put it in a file. Anything of that nature is fine. Something that you can refer back to without relying on your memory is going to be, I would say, good advice from a documentation perspective.
And Tasha, I think one of the things you said that kind of stands out to me is to share where associates are maybe not doing so well. And that's so critical. And we see that so much where it is as a manager, as a leader, you know where the gaps are and you see them in your particular employee, but the employee may not see it. And if you guys think about what a fast-paced industry you guys are in, people are constantly moving. So maybe remembering an interaction that didn't go well at the beginning of the day when they've had 25 tables and I don't know how many people that they've seen, it's really tough to expect them to remember that particular instance or that something didn't go well. So being really clear, because what you will find is an associate may think that they're not doing well in X, Y, and Z, but you think they're not doing well in A, B, and C. And so the associate is fixing something that maybe doesn't need to be fixed and then missing the areas that you need fixed. So that dialogue and that regular communication is really important. One of the things that works really well for me when I'm preparing for something is questions. And so what you'll see on this slide is we really built this off of the questions and the dialogues we've had with Victoria and team in terms of the types of questions to ask yourself to prepare. And so I think this is regardless of industry. But it's really thinking about what's the final outcome. What do you want your employee to hear? What is your key message? What is the feedback that is critical for them to move forward? And that can be areas that they're doing well or areas of opportunity as well. I like to create a document. I don't necessarily write everything down, but what are the key points that I want to hit? What are some of the key pieces? I also find that a lot of employees work really well when you can give them examples. For example, if it was Tasha, you are great at speaking to your clients. And so here are some of the ways that I've seen it play out in these particular conversations. And Tasha, here are some of the places where I think, you need to spend a little bit more time. We walked out of conversation A, and they were really having a hard time understanding what it is that you're saying. Give them examples so that they can see how those opportunities and those strengths are showing up. Now, we really ask ourselves when we put things on paper, it allows us to see our biases. And so we do ask our leaders to check their biases as they're having conversations. Are your expectations realistic? Is it the same expectations that you hold for everybody? Are you kind of equal on both sides on strengths and areas of opportunity? And if you're not, what's the why behind it? And then is your message clear and direct? It may make sense in your head, but coming out and being received by an individual, it may sound different. So one of the things that I often recommend, and people often giggle a little bit, they're like, oh my God, no, is to practice. Practice in front of somebody, practice in front of the mirror, ask somebody to read your notes. Getting that different perspective will help you. And you could walk away and say, for example, if I had Tasha read my notes, which I do a lot, is what message did you walk away with, Tasha? Does it align to the message that I'm trying to deliver? Really have a dialogue and practice that. The other piece, this is probably really tough in your industry, is the logistics. But we spend a lot of time planning on logistics. You want to make sure it's a place that's private. If you think the individual is going to have a particular reaction, that they can have that reaction in private. Are they going to be able to hear the dialogue? As much as you can control the environment, if you have this at the end of a really busy night, you're both probably going to be exhausted and your fuse may be a little low. Is there a way to do it earlier in the day? Really thinking about all of the key pieces that are going to make the conversation successful and it's not going to take away from it. And being able to remove as many distractions and disruptions as possible. And then stop and think about what the associate's reaction is going to be. If you think they're going to be upset and they're going to cry, then provide them some tissues. If you can't find a private place, put their back towards where the crowd is so that they can have a little bit more privacy. Try and set up some scenarios that will help you truly be successful in the conversation. Tasha, anything? I know that we've seen some of these go wrong that kind of stick out to you that we could help people get ahead of?
Yes, absolutely. So there were a couple I think about. We talk about the biases there. It's just really being aware of what I call the like me syndrome, where as you're thinking about how an employee is doing something, if it is incorrect and needs improvement, then definitely give that feedback. But I would always say stop and think, is it wrong because that's not how I would do it? Or is it because that's not what we say is how it should be done based on our practices, guidelines, whatever the founding sort of principles are? And so definitely being mindful of that and not having that sort of like me. That definitely is an area in which things have gone wrong in the past, where it's like, we've gotten the right answer and it's right. I just didn't do it the way you did it. Doesn't mean that it was incorrect. So definitely being mindful of that. I would also say tailoring the message to your individual. As Nicole said, you know how they're going to react, and no two employees are going to be the same, right? And so just being able to tailor that to prepare for how the individual is likely going to respond will help as you prepare the conversation, so that you can be proactive and kind of prepare for that. If they are a crier, right, and most people are, it may not be best to give them that conversation as they are waiting on a 25-person table, right? That may be one that you want to maybe capture some notes and maybe give them that feedback, or have the conversation later in the day, or give them that review later in the day or the next day, if you know that they will not be able to go back and attend to their party in the manner in which you have set for expectations for your restaurant. So just all things to think about in preparing for the moment, not only for the individual, but yourself as well.
I like that. And the just like me, Tasha, it comes up so much. And I'm working with a leader right now. And so my question to them is often, is the result that you needed? And if it is, and they got there in their own way, do we really need to coach it? Or is this an opportunity where they're just doing something similar? We want to allow people the opportunity to kind of do things their own way in a lot of instances, where it doesn't kind of break down any bigger process or protocol and things like that. So, checking yourselves with some of those questions makes a really big difference. And now kind of in the conversation and actually delivering the review. I know it feels like a lot of setup, but it does make a big difference once you're in the conversation. The number one is be present. Stay focused. We talked about removing distractions. If you need to have your phone because there's an alarm on it, flip it. Try not to have technology in front of you. We often recommend if you can go in with paper versus your computer, that makes a big difference. Your body language is a really big deal. It is eye contact. It is open body language, not kind of arms crossed. It crosses and it stops people being able to connect with you. So really being thoughtful about it. Ask open-ended questions. Build those into the conversation. Like, where do you want that particular employee to go ahead and share their perspectives? Some employees don't like being put on the spot, or they tend to have experiences where reviews is a one-way dialogue, so they're not prepared to talk. And if that is your employee, then let them know that you're going to want to have a two-way dialogue, that you're going to want to hear from them what they thought went well and didn't go well. So set them up with those questions if you think it is something that they're not going to be able to do on the fly. Oftentimes what we hear from leaders is, I delivered the review. I said everything I needed to say. And then a month later, we're in the same place and the employee is saying, oh, I didn't hear that. One of the really helpful ways to do it is to ask the employee just to recap, whether it be at the end of the conversation. But what did you hear? What are you walking away with? What's the most important piece of information that you have? That allows you to be able to frame up, I think you missed the main message, or yes, that's exactly where I need you to double down on. And I'm really excited about us continuing to work together. So use that question and that recap as your ability to understand where they are in the process. And then do a recap at the end of the conversation in terms of, hey, here are the main takeaways from this dialogue. I will tell you there's a lot of awkward pieces to employee reviews. I'll just put it out there. But one that we find is really awkward for employees is, what do I do next? I just got all of this information, and then this is going to happen again at the end of the following year. And so one of the things that we urge our leaders and people managers to do is to really sit down and share, what is the next step? Do you need to follow up with them? Do you want them to put a plan together? Do you want to continue having these dialogues once a quarter? Really be able to share with them how this is going to live and breathe, how you guys are going to connect again on it. Tasha, any other tips and tricks that kind of come to mind as people actually deliver the reviews?
I think the recap, as I look at this, is probably where I would definitely make sure that you kind of spend some time there, just ensuring that the employee has walked away with what you want them to walk away with, right? And so definitely don't underestimate just the importance of that recap and just how far it can go. We've all had those instances where someone walks away with a very different understanding, and then the next day you're like, we just talked about that. No, like, no, we didn't. And so just recapping that at the end, I think is really, really good. From the next up perspective, I think the only thing I would add here is, just ensuring that the employee knows that even if you're having to give them difficult feedback, that you're there to support them, right? Like, hey, I'm in this with you. How can I help you get better at this, right? We've talked about this a couple of times, or I see that you maybe need help with, as you are maybe helping larger parties. How can I help you get more comfortable in that space? How can I help you to ensure that you're able to come to work on time? That builds some rapport, some two-way dialogue, and it helps the associate or the employee. I'm sorry, you hear me say associate. We refer to our folks internally at Capital One as associates, but I mean employees and those that you work with and whatever you call them. How do you help your partners and your folks be their best self? And if they know that you are there in it with them, there to help them, it goes a long way in receiving even the most difficult conversation. And so I would definitely make sure that you find ways to kind of, give that, they say, kill them with kindness kind of thing, or, being reprimanded with love, making sure that you're just still adding in that touch to say, I'm here for you, I'm supporting, I'm not giving up on you because you need to do better. I'm just really trying to help you. And so help me help you so that we can work together.
I love that, Tasha. And what I would add as well is the importance of, building in time to help people. So, for example, if they're having time with the organization that it takes, to have multiple tables, is role play with them. Have them come in and walk you through how it is they do things. Help them think about it differently, or tips and tricks that work really well. Giving one-on-one time, even if it's 30 minutes, makes a really big difference. And so it shows that you're invested in that particular individual. Before we jump into difficult conversations, Victoria, anything you'd add from your experience, or maybe questions that we haven't gotten to around employee reviews?
So, I would add thank you. I think this has been incredibly solid information to share. I think a couple of notes, just words that I jotted down while we were talking. Documentation is so important. I don't know if things have changed since I've actually been working in restaurants, but I know the documentation, the follow-up, the recapping. I mean, working with the foundation, working in Capital One, everybody's very used to email. Everybody's very used to having files for things. Restaurants are not often like that. So I think it's the extra step of making sure there's a file, making sure that's a secure file and not just the manager computer that's available to 17 different people in the office, which is still going to exist. That's still going to be what it is. But making sure that that's a password protected part of that machine are things that I think maybe aren't always thought of, but it certainly is. It's incredibly important in when we're talking about these sort of professional reviews and things like that. But it also shows that you are respectful of your employees and that you value that privacy, you value that security, and that you want to make sure that you yourself are not being misunderstood, that they understand exactly what they've done really well or what, like you said, needs a little bit of work. And I think that that's the other part of reviews that people often think it's just bad stuff that we need to sit down and talk about. I think it's great to have check-in reviews, even if it's just 10 minutes where you're checking in with someone every few months saying, like, you've done this so well, your progress on your wine knowledge has come a long way, or your progress on, following up on this side work is come a long way. These things are, they're good positive reinforcements, and reviews and kind of employee messaging doesn't always need to be negative. It's in fact better to have that dialogue going on all the time rather than, oh, so-and-so's angry. I can see that's why they're out here talking to us, and to make sure that you're the person to go to in both the good times and the struggling times, so that every guest ultimately is taken care of in the very best way that we can when we're talking about restaurants. So there were no other questions that have come in, but just a reminder to all of our attendees, please do be sending those questions in. Either I'll be able to talk to our panelists about that, or my colleague who is running the back end will be able to answer. There was a question just about these slides themselves. This webinar will be archived, so anybody that has missed it, anybody from your restaurant that has missed it, you will be able to check it out as early as tomorrow in that archive. Let's go on to difficult conversations.
Awesome. And Victoria, I'm going to build off of a point that you said there before we jump into difficult conversations, which is you talked about, someone kind of expanding their wine knowledge. The more that you can share in terms of what you've witnessed that someone has built that skill or that ability, it shows that you're invested in them. And so as you give your compliments or your recognition, the more personal you can make it and say things such as, I see how hard you doubled down and kind of learning your wines and their pairings and things like that. And it's evident in X, Y, and Z. It shows that you care. That goes a really long way. And then I think some of the documentation is building habits. So absolutely in a secure file, password protected. I have a lot of leaders in the retail branches who would dedicate time on Fridays in the mornings, kind of before the branch opened, and that was their time to take quick notes for each one of their files on things that had happened during that week, whether it was positive or areas of opportunity. And so they were constantly building in that skill. So once a week when they had to sit down and do something more formal, they had notes to look back on. So some of it could be just building some skills whenever you all have a little bit of downtime. I know that there's not a lot of it. That can help you really prepare for when you have to do something a little bit more formal and time intensive. So on to difficult conversations. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There was one question that came in. Should reviews always be conducted with more than one manager present? Or do you have any recommendations for when an extra person should be involved or when just the manager to employee is enough?
So Tasha, would love for you to kind of chime in. We get this question a lot, even internally. My recommendation is usually one-on-one. It is really tough to have two people sitting on one side of the table and you're the person receiving on the other side. So where possible, I really like it to be a one-on-one conversation, and documentation plays a big portion of it. Your notes plays a big portion of kind of documenting what took place. There are instances where you're going to want to have a witness, and so that's when you would want to bring in that second person. And so I think it depends on the particular situation. And think about, is it necessary to let the employee know ahead of time, or is it something that's just going to kind of happen? And so really being planful of how it happens, introducing the person, their role while they're there, so that everybody's clear on what's going to take place. But Tasha, what are some of your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I would agree. My go-to is always the one-on-one, just to remove any extras as much as possible. But again, going back to knowing the person that you are speaking with is going to really determine whether or not a second person is necessary. I think about it from the standpoint of if they are argumentative, if they are, one to have a really strong reaction, that you are concerned that you may need assistance with that conversation, right? That may be a good time to have someone else there who can just maybe de-escalate as they are sort of reiterating what you are trying to put forth. And then, of course, thinking about worst case, if there's a safety security concern that you have based on prior experiences of someone, that, of course, is always a good time to have a second individual there to assist in those conversations.
And I think what I would add, and Tasha would love your thoughts on this as well, is if you're going to go outside, if your norm is to have one-on-one conversations and you're going to step outside of the norm to have two people in the conversation, is just being documented on the why, because you may be treating people differently. And so there may be the opt-out that comes up is, why is it that we have two people in this conversation and only one person in the other one? So just really being thoughtful and clear on your thought process around the why and just documenting it, because again, you guys have a lot that's going on. So remember why I had Tasha join that conversation 3 months ago is just really tough. But Tasha, what are your thoughts on that thought?
No, I absolutely agree, just so that they know why, right? It was important to have an extra individual there. I would also, add in terms of who that second person is, who's the best person, right? If possible, you want it to be another supervisor, another owner, someone who is known to be in a leadership position, so it isn't awkward to the employee that, oh, it makes sense that Victoria is here because she is Nicole's manager versus Nicole is my peer, or Nicole is, just the person who comes and helps seasonally. Why is she in my review, or why is she in this conversation, right? And I know that resources may be scarce, and so it may be that Victoria's the only other person on the floor at that time who can step in because you really need a second person. Again, explaining the why will just kind of help minimize anything that could bubble up later if you have to bring in someone.
And I think this kind of leads into some of the next questions and probably our next section. This first section was about employee reviews, where we're actually having a plan where we want to have a conversation. Maybe that's a regular review, or maybe that's an acute issue that has come up, and we want to have a plan to talk about that. Some of the new questions that are coming in are kind of having conversations, making corrections in the moment. Something is happening. I'm seeing you do this, whatever that is. I'm your manager, and we need to address this right away. This isn't something we can wait for. So I think that might be going into our next section of awkward conversations, and just how to have those immediate conversations without the structure of a sit down review, and even the idea of having to pull someone. Sometimes you do need to. In a restaurant, sometimes a person needs to be let go at a moment, and it's not a different time. It's not tomorrow. Sometimes that's an immediate issue. And when do you need to pull people in? How do you have those conversations? What's the best way? And I think that might be, other than one other question of emailing an employee a recap, do you recommend having both the employee and the manager's thoughts on that recap, or do you recommend that coming just from the manager saying, these were the points I talked about. We talked about, Tasha, 1, 2, 3, just so we can recap? Or would you recommend, here's what we talked about, here's what I said, here's what you said? Do you have a recommendation there?
I think I'll start in the recap. I think from there, again, it really just depends on the individual and the circumstance and how they tend to receive the feedback. If it is one of you and 50 employees, right, it may be helpful, or you could even have them send a recap, right, and make it into a part of the regular interaction. Hey, at the end of this, send me a recap of what you heard to make sure that we're on the same page. But if you as a manager are sending the recap, I would send it to the associate as, hey, just as a reminder, we talked about A, B, and C. At the end of our call, at the end of our meeting, say you're going to do X, Y, and Z. If I miss anything, please let me know. That way you are inviting the employee to kind of share their feedback, come back and kind of recorrect something that may have been maybe heard differently, but you're still kind of ensuring that you guys are aligning on the message at the end of the day.
Great. Okay. So difficult conversations. Let's dive in.
And we can absolutely build in. So we're going to quickly talk about this slide, and then there's a couple of scenarios. And so maybe, Tasha, you and I ad-lib a little bit here and just make sure we get to some of the scenarios. But with difficult conversations, I think planning is always helpful. But Victoria, to your point, that may not always be the case. Even if you can take 5 minutes to step aside and take a deep breath and even think about, what do I need to do? What are the key critical steps? Just sometimes taking a step back, there's a little bit of clarity that provides there. Sometimes it's not possible, so use your best judgment when you can. Be thoughtful about the logistics. If you need to terminate somebody, it is, do not do it in the kitchen. Do not do it on the floor. Can you pull them aside to an office? Can you pull them outside back? Kind of, where is it that you can kind of have them go? Sometimes the things that we need to think about is going back to get their stuff. Or is somebody going to bring it to them? I know that's usually the first thing on the top of someone's mind when you've terminated them is how do I get my stuff? They're in a little bit of that flight and fight, and they're trying to flight, but they need their stuff to kind of get out. And so being planful on how you're going to get that is going to be helpful there. Keep your message simple. Do not go into a ton of details. If you need to tell somebody that they're being terminated, or you need to tell them that you need to cut their pay, what are the key facts? Associates or employees, are going to focus in on the first few things that they hear, and then they're probably going to go into a bit of a state of shock. So you really want to focus on what is that key message. If you can, and if it's applicable, provide the why. Context is often helpful. If you need to give a message, we need to cut hours, we need to cut hourly rates. the why behind it is really helpful, especially if that why shows that it is not just them. Associates often, employees often have a easier time getting through things when they know it's not just them, because then it takes some of the personal away. Doesn't mean that it's not difficult, but it can help that particular situation. And ensure your next steps are clear. What is it that they need to do next, and being real clear on that. Minimize the small talk. So oftentimes, we are feeling uncomfortable going into the conversation because we know it's going to happen. And so we start with a lot of chatter. Minimize the chatter. You can come in and say, I have a difficult conversation to have with you, Victoria, so I'm going to jump right in, and then go straight into the message that you need to deliver. Again, remove your distractions. The other thing that happens, you can often notice in difficult conversations, your heart may be racing. Your body wants to get rid of this adrenaline and get out of this conversation. And so we may speed up in it. And in that speed up, we may lose our audience. So really pace yourself on the conversation. If it is something such as, salary and schedule, or that the associate has an emotional reaction, that personal connection with a follow-up, a text message, a call, a couple of hours later the following day makes a big difference as well. And Tasha, a question for you. Where is it that you find that most managers don't double down, and you would like them to spend more time to kind of help through some of these difficult conversations?
Yeah, I would say that's more so around the manager themselves, and understanding your emotions and trigger points as you are preparing to have the conversation with the employee. You are preparing, of course, to deliver it, so you're thinking about the employee's sort of point of view and their vantage point, but never underestimate your own emotions, right? And what's going to trigger you. What has this individual historically said to sort of push your buttons, and how do you prepare for that? How do you sort of be on guard for that, so that you are not coming through as overly emotional versus giving the objective, factual information that you want them to know in a difficult conversation. I think, something that's in here in the crafting part, definitely getting to the point and stressing what you want the assistant to know at the beginning of the conversation is key, because oftentimes after they've heard that, they're tuning you out. Right? And so what you want them to walk away with, the earlier in the conversation that is addressed, definitely is better in ensuring that it's not a long, drawn out sort of conversation, but it is one that's clear, that's concise, that's not going on and on, that is objective, and you have clear action items to walk away from, and time to pause, regroup, even delay the conversation if it need be. With the delay, I mean, if things are just definitely starting to go in the position where you're like, we're not really getting anywhere, this is not productive anymore, know that it's okay to pause. You don't have to trudge forth and kind of continue to have things escalate just for the sake of giving the feedback at the moment. But that also doesn't mean you have to give a pass. It's okay to pause that conversation and say, you know what? I think it may be better if we revisit this conversation tomorrow or later on. So how about we plan to just pull back up in the morning after we both had a chance to think about it, and be able to come back and have a productive conversation. That is a tool that you also can use at any time, and don't hesitate to sort of pull that out of your toolbox, just to kind of pause things to ensure that you are always grounded, objective, and as little emotion as possible. Not being stoic, right? But not coming off as just overly emotional where the associate is now missing the objective fact that you want them to walk away with.
And I think that's so important, Tasha, because oftentimes associates, again, are in that flight or fight mode. And so they are looking for a reaction out of you. And they're not doing it purposefully, but they are hurt. And so they're looking either for an open window or someone to blame. And so it is just important to kind of stick to the facts, stick to the message that you're trying to deliver. And if it cannot be delivered, is pausing the conversation. Tasha, would love your thoughts before we go in terms of, I usually recommend going in a little bit stronger with the language of, if this conversation is not going well, it's not productive, I'm going to pause the conversation now, and we'll find time tomorrow for us to reconnect. But yours is a little bit softer. So I don't know if you kind of go in a little bit softer and then go in harsher, and I'm just a harsh individual. It could be.
I tend to do go in softer first, right? But if you find that you're starting to have like this round robin, we're kind of like continuing to just go back and forth, we're not getting anywhere, my guidance is generally, I won't repeat the same thing no more than 3 times. After that, and it just continues to go a little bit firmer with each sort of iteration of that. And by the 3rd iteration, then it's like, you know what, we're going to have to just call this, basically. But yeah, that I try that broken record sort of approach first and just continue to escalate if I need to, but only 3 rounds of that. I definitely wouldn't say difficult conversations is the time to have this back and forth debate, this knockout, drag down fight sort of thing, to prove that I'm the manager, I'm the owner, I'm the supervisor, I'm right. Definitely, after 3 iterations, I would just say, you know what, let's just regroup tomorrow when we both have a chance to talk about this at a more level head.
And I'm going to channel my Tasha. If you're having one of these conversations, document the conversations. If there's anything you walk away with, it is truly to document. I'm going to maybe hop us forward to the messaging for common scenarios. And these are some of the ones that we heard from you all. So I'm going to put Tasha on the spot on a little bit because she probably handles a lot more of these than I do. Mm-hmm. But I think the number one thing is you're going to want to start with the facts. You're delivering a difficult message. And as Tasha mentioned, people are going to tune you out. So what is it that you need to hear on pay and in schedule? Both of those, I think, are going to be critical. I think the other thing that I would keep in mind, and someone taught me this on one of the coaches that I've worked with, was hope when you're delivering a difficult message is something that we want to give people. But if we are not certain of that hope, then we should not give it to them. And what the intent there is if you're delivering to somebody and telling them that their pay is going to get cut in half, and you say, maybe there's a chance that it's not going to be that much, and then you come back with, no, it is going to be the 50%, you've really knocked them down twice. So be really careful on promising anything. That's not to say that if there's something that you can do, that you do that behind the scenes, but we don't want to give that false hope until we have certainty. So let the associate know the facts that you know, and if there's something you can explore on the back end, do so and then come back when it's certain. Tasha, what are your thoughts on comp or paid conversations and schedules and things for people to keep in mind there?
I would say know that those are very triggering conversations no matter the situation. Your most even-keeled employee who never gets rattled, who takes everything with an optimistic view, is going to have a strong reaction to hear that their pay is being cut, their hours are being cut, things along those lines, because it just impacts not only them, but their family and overall livelihood. So they definitely just kind of keep in the humanity in the conversation, being mindful of that. We all know the golden rule, treat others in the way that you want to be treated. Definitely is something that comes to mind as I think about conversations that are discharging, definitely being mindful of that. And I would also, just be, again, as Nicole said, just as factual as you can be. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know. No one expects you to have all the answers. If you do, that's fantastic. But don't feel that you have to come up with something just to satisfy a question if you're not sure. So don't be afraid, especially with something as important as pay or things that impact livelihood. If you need to go back and research, go back and kind of verify something, say that, right? Like, you know what, I'm not really sure. Let me look into that and get back with you later. And whatever later is that you establish, sticking to that and making sure that you're honoring that, because the employee is going to be looking for that to make whatever decisions they have to based on what you're sharing. So just keeping your work from a follow-up perspective is going to be key.
Yeah, and to put a finer point on that, Tasha, it's defining what later is. It's going to take me 2 days to get an answer. Like, the more that you can give them concrete on when to expect to hear from you, again, you're giving them certainty in a world that they've lost control. And things are shifting for them and they need to make decisions. For norms and practices, I spent the weekend kind of doing a little bit of research as we kind of worked with the James Beard Foundation to prep for this, and kind of spent some time on empowered hospitality. And really, they talked about that constant communication. And I will tell you, in this world of COVID, for us, that constant communication is really important. And so if you are expecting changes for your employees, it's share with them the facts as you know them. Have those regular touch points. The more consistent that you can make them, the better, because again, they know what to expect. The more that we can give people a sense of security and a sense of what to expect in this world that we can't control, that has a lot going on, the better that is for them. I'm going to jump
Sure.
quickly to the performance because Victoria, I think that kind of gets to some of the issues that you had talked about or questions that came in, which is around no-shows, late getting in or returning from a break, disrespecting managers or teammates. And we'll get into conflict resolution towards the end. But I think the number one is your employee file is going to be really important for this. You're going to want to stick to the facts. Keep a calendar, keep track of when your employees have been no-shows, keep track of when they're getting in late or returning late from break. And then once you have kind of a set number in terms of anytime someone, does this 3 times, I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with them, stick to that. Don't flex because of personal circumstances or because there's a story and things like that. You want to treat people consistently and you want to set those expectations. Again, stick to the facts. People are going to want to debate you. People are going to want to find out what the wiggle room is. And so know that and really stick to the facts and come in with concrete answers in order to be able to address the particular situation. Tasha, I know we get no-shows and tardies and things like that all the time. Anything else that you would add to that?
I think consistency is key in terms of what is okay. As in terms of an excuse or justification that someone gives for being late, tardy, or being a complete no-show. So just being consistent there with what's okay and what's not, so that it doesn't feel as if someone is getting preferential treatment over another or something along those lines. But this is also a spot where documentation is key. If it comes to a point where they are now having so many no-shows that you're going to have to make an employment decision, right? Let them go or let them stay. As much as you are documented and have the dates, the times, that kind of thing will be very helpful to refer back to later in the event that you have someone who is challenging that decision in any way. Those are the 2 key things I would say. Disrespect to the manager of the team. That's definitely a big one. I would say, again, being objective is probably a good key there versus, I don't want to say being subjective in that you're taking it personal, but you definitely don't want to take it personal, knowing that and oftentimes they are upset at maybe a situation, not necessarily you, but even if it is you, know that just by sheer definition as your, of your role as the manager, a supervisor, boss, chef, whatever the case may be from a leadership perspective, you are often the person who's delivering these messages, right? And so you are the person who's to blame for them. And then sometimes that disrespect, that sort of like, response or backlash is targeted to you. So just balancing the objective with the why, and this kind of thing with, okay, is this egregious enough? Do we need to now take some more formal action there?
And Victoria, I want to pause if there's questions, and I know that I'm talking a lot to us up after this, but any questions coming through or anything that you would add that we maybe didn't get to?
Yeah, there are two questions that are in the chat right now that I think I don't know if they were meant to be necessarily related or if they are necessarily related, but they certainly can be read that way. The first is, how do you have a conversation with a manager who doesn't ask for help but you see them struggling? And the second is, how would you approach an employee over drug use? It's a very difficult conversation. So I'm looking at these like they could be a little related in that there's a lot of folks right now who have additional stress beyond just, their business or their livelihood, but it's a stressful time. And people are turning to other ways to vent those stresses and vent those frustrations. And so I think certainly the restaurant industry is especially, I think, rife with stories of drug use, of late nights, of alcohol. There's a lot of those kinds of elements that end up happening, because it's work that's being done and you get done in the middle, late at night. And there's just, it's always been kind of that similar story. I think that now more than ever, there's probably folks that are going down a path because it's depressing, it's sad, it's scary out there. From an HR perspective, this is leaving aside the fact that these employees, our fellow employees, are our friends, they're our family. From an HR perspective, what can a person do to help a manager that they see is struggling, to see an employee that they see is struggling with, drug use? It's someone that you certainly want to maybe not be interacting with your customers, but bigger than that, you're worried about somebody that you care about. And what, from an HR perspective, can we do? What are methods that we can take to ensure that this person is not a danger to themselves, as well as their fellow employees and customers? Do you have any advice in that realm?
I will say that, what you just said is going to be the most important. That's in terms of safety first, right? You want to ensure first and foremost that the individual in question is safe and not in a position to hurt themselves or others. Once you have kind of satisfied that, and if that means that you have to remove them from the environment, if they are just obviously from the behaviors under the influence of something, intoxicated, stumbling, that kind of thing, that's a safety thing, not only for the individual customers, but also thinking about your reputation of the restaurant in question. And so your first thing would definitely be removing the individual in a way that's certainly non-confrontational, but with care. Is there someone I can call for you? I think we need to, have you go home for the rest of the day, take care of yourself. Who can I call to come and get you, that kind of thing. It's a good way to sort of lead into it. And then also just ensuring that there is some sort of resource that you can offer for help. As you mentioned, Victoria, these times are just very taxing on anybody, right? And so it's just difficult, and everyone is handling in their own special way. And it's difficult more so for some than maybe for others. And so if there are things like an employee assistance program or some sort of advocacy program that you guys would have in your restaurants, utilizing them as well to kind of step in as professionals who can really assess the situation, whether it's counseling, whether it's removal, whatever the case may be, to really determine what is happening. If you know for sure it is drugs and alcohol, then that may be something that, if your restaurant does drug testing, or things, you could certainly utilize that to be very certain. I always give caution to managers in this space because there are lots of legal or prescription medications for things that may have similar side effects that could show up as someone being under the influence of something recreational, right? And you never want to assume in those places, because on the medical side, that could be protected activity. And you don't want to treat someone as if they're under something recreational when in fact they are under something that would qualify for, say, FMLA or some other protected leave. And so really assessing the behaviors. What are you seeing? Is it a pattern? What can I do to remove them immediately from the situation to protect our customers and themselves, and then later pull in whatever resources and support is available to truly assess the situation and determine what the appropriate next steps are. If your restaurant has a no tolerance policy, you want to honor your no tolerance policy. You give someone an inch, you're going to take a mile, right? Because you got to be consistent here. And so just being aware of your policies and your position on a type of behavior and addressing accordingly when the matter comes up.
And I think I'll just double down. I think what Tasha, like you and I have worked and kind of AR in general is in anything, don't make assumptions. Right? Like ask questions, address the behavior that you're seeing. You're falling asleep at work. You're having a hard time walking. What's going on? If you jump in with assumptions, again, to Tasha's point, you don't know what's going on, and that can lead to kind of a bigger issue or conflict. Right. And I know we only have 6 minutes left, but Tasha, do you want to take the topic of harassment? I know you have a couple of slides here that we can talk through.
Yeah, and I'll go through them, guys, and definitely, if there are questions that come up, definitely, let us know. But we wanted to definitely cover this because you guys are in the industry where folks are definitely coming in contact and interactions with each other very frequently. And this is something that, unfortunately does happen, out in the world, and that's the space of harassment. I'll say, most folks are aware of sexual harassment, but there are definitely many other forms. But, the key is understanding exactly what is harassment. It is that unlawful conduct that is unwelcomed, that happens on a repeated basis. That's the unwelcomed piece. So the first key is just making sure that, if there is something happening, that you understand if it is a pattern, and being aware that you have the right and are definitely encouraged to tell the individual that their behavior, their actions, their flirtation, whatever the case may be, is absolutely unwelcomed. That is putting them on notice from a legal perspective that that behavior should not continue. If it does beyond that point, that's when we are in the harassment space. And I definitely want you to reach out to whomever you consult with on an HR perspective or a legal perspective to assist in those areas, so that not only only you yourself as owners and leaders, but your customers, your employees feel they can come into the restaurant, the kitchen, whatever the case may be, and it's a very safe environment where they can be them best selves without being subjected to any sort of hostile or abusive behavior. Next slide. Like we talked about there being various forms of it, sexual being one of them. I think that is one that most folks are familiar with, and it really is just these unwelcomed advances, requests for sexual favors, sexual misconduct, all based on your sex. This can be same sex or opposite sex, does not matter from a legal perspective either way. It is wrong, it's inappropriate. It can be in manners that you may think about, the touching, that kind of thing, but it also can be in the forms of jokes, things that are intended to be, funny or in jest. If it's inappropriate based on sex, that is constituting sexual harassment, if it's continuing. Next slide. Quid pro quo, I would say from a management perspective, this is one kind of the same type of harassment as sexual. I would say you're held to a higher degree if I think about it, like in sort of ranges there. It's when you're almost kind of like blackmailing someone to do what you're asking them to do. And so it's the Latin phrase for this, for that, meaning that if you go out with me, if you give into my advances, then I will promote you to, sous chef, or I will, give you that raise you've been asking for. And if they don't, you actually follow through with the threat. If it's such that you did not give in, so therefore I was not promoted, that could be a quid pro quo situation where the individual in question who's actually conducting that behavior could be held liable. And as a company, you're held at a higher standard there. Hostile work environment is a big one. It's a very broad brush. I call it out because it's one that probably covers everything else. This is where your workplace bullying comes in. This is where anything where someone feels uncomfortable, could be because of a protected class, race, age, sex, gender, all those things, or it could be something completely different, right? I feel like as we're going into this election year, I always call that out, right? Something as simple as I am the only person in my restaurant who's of the opposite political party. And so I feel like it's a very hostile environment when I come into this space because I'm subjected to all the comments, the jokes, the rants, whatever. And so these are all things that can create a very toxic environment, is why we call it out. In addition to being illegal, I hope that it's also a policy violation from a company and restaurant perspective, because these are very slippery slopes where folks could continue to say that, hey, I've been put in this environment. I'm feeling as if I am treated differently. It's very uncomfortable for me, the abuse or hostility or whatever phrase is used that I am subjected to. From a leadership perspective, what I would call out is that if you hear of, see of anything along these lines, you absolutely want to raise that to whomever is appropriate in your organization. Again, HR partners, legal partners, because it is illegal and you are obligated to take action to stop that behavior, not only to improve the restaurant and kitchen's morale, but also just to be compliant with the law, right? Think about reputational risk, all the things that come to mind. You think about Me Too movement or anything else that we've seen in the media on these topics. And so just being mindful that they show up in various forms, even if it's, ended with a ha-ha, I'm just playing, you want to make sure you're taking the appropriate steps to address it. That was my 60 mile an hour version of harassment. I will definitely, be happy to, if there are questions that come later, go into a deeper dive if needed.
And the next, and we saw this a lot in the questions that were kind of sent over, and even in the ones earlier this afternoon, which is really conflict resolution, which comes up in any work environment when you have people that are working together. So if we could flip to the next slide, we can kind of go ahead and focus on your role as manager. And so the number one thing I would say is before you go into a conversation where you have two parties who are arguing or not getting along, is setting the ground rules. What are your expectations? People need to be respectful. Each person will have enough time to talk. You're going to go ahead and moderate that. Another important one is this is not to go outside of these four walls. So the conversation stays here. It does not go out. It is not something we share with others. And asking everybody listen to understand versus respond. And so oftentimes what happens in conflict is people are listening to argue because they want to get their point across. The intent really here is for each one of us to hear the other side of it so that we can get to a better place. And so keeping your ears out for that, listening to respond versus to understand the other party involved. As the manager, as the leader, your role is to facilitate the conversation. Try as much as you can to make sure that each person has the same amount of time. Recap what's being said, especially because sometimes we tend to go on monologues in these situations. Is just, okay, so Victoria, this is what I heard from you. Does that sound right? Great. Tasha, what are some of your thoughts based on what was said? Or what is your side of the story? Really facilitate, engage, and kind of lead the conversation. Find common ground when possible. Oftentimes you'll find two people were offended. And so if you can find, hey, both of you were offended, both of you, it sounds like, are feeling this way, you're creating a little bit of a connection there that can help you all get to the same place because you all want to get out of this. And ask questions to lead to resolution. Sometimes it's okay at the beginning of the conversation if there's a little bit of venting that goes on, but you really quickly want to get to what's the other side of this and how it is that we get there. So use your questions in order to help the group to get there. When you wrap up, thank everybody for their participation. Align on next steps. There's likely going to be another conversation or expectations that are set of both parties. And remind employees that it is part of their job for them to be able to work together. And so not everybody's going to be best friends. Not everybody is going to go out and have drinks together. But it is their responsibility when they're working in the restaurant is to be able to work productively. Now, this is really kind of a best case scenario. So Tasha, to toss a difficult one over to you. So what happens if this doesn't work? What are some of the things that you've seen happen or things that people can walk away with if kind of this mediation does not work?
I think one thing I would say when you see that it's not working is, as much as possible, there in the moment with the individuals in question, not taking sides. You don't want to, try to say, hey, you know what, Victoria, you're right. Nicole, you were wrong there, and you should do it again. Now, that is a conversation that likely may need to happen, but it should be done individually. I think in the moment with all the parties there, you definitely say, you know what, let me think about this and walk away. I've heard from you, and I've got some takeaways and some thoughts on my own. So for now, what I would like for you to do is ensure that we are remaining respect and professionalism here in the kitchen, but we'll follow back up tomorrow to talk about some other action steps that we can have. And then you can think about what you want to walk away with and then have individual conversations for very tailored instructions as you need to, if you find that you're not able to do it in that kind of initial round of a mediation. The other thing is there may be times when you're going to have to agree to disagree, right? If you are very clear that what is happening is definitely just against what the kitchen rules are, what the restaurant rules are, and the individual just is not seeing it because they lack self-awareness, think that they're always right, whatever the case may be, we may have to really disagree and say, hey, you know what, I hear you, but as you can recall, the terms of your employment say A, B, and C. I am not seeing that. And so if there's something I can do to make it clearer for you or to help you do that, I'm all for that. But, at the end of the day, I need you to do A, B, and C. And if you can't do that, then let's talk about it so I can help you think about what other next steps may need to be. Is what you'll have to do to you have to just kind of put your stake in the ground and put your foot down for the sake of just creating harmony and adhering to your policies in the kitchen there.
One of the things that I heard in one of my previous roles, I had two employees who didn't get along, and so my solution was to change schedules. And someone quickly typed in, change both of their schedules, because if you leave one person in their current schedule, that is viewed as winning. So if you can't get the parties to kind of work together, is try to treat them as equally as possible to get everything into a state that is going to be more productive. But to your point, Tasha, it's setting expectations in terms of, hey, this is your contract, these are the expectations, and this is what we need to see. And you may need to get to that point to have that really direct conversation.
Yeah, and just being mindful that if it does come to such where you have to change schedules or change positions, just being mindful of the impact that's having on the person who brought the complaint forward to begin with. Even though the intent could be that I'm going to give you a schedule that will allow you to not have as much friction, it could be viewed or perceived as I'm being penalized for this person, who is harassing me or creating this environment for me. And so just being mindful of that, if there is a change, the individual who's brought the matter forward to begin with, is something to always keep in mind.
I think that's a great point, Tasha, because what we want to remember is we want to make sure that we're creating a culture where people feel comfortable sharing and bringing things up when there's issues, especially something as serious as harassment. And so how you handle this particular situation, whether we like it or not, word is likely going to get out. And so you really want to make sure that people feel as if there's a fairness to what is happening so that they do feel comfortable raising things as they come up. So I know that we're over time and we've rushed through two key topics here, Victoria. Any questions that are coming through that we can address?
There were a couple of questions that came in. One I thought was particularly good. What are your thoughts on referring to your restaurant team as your restaurant family rather than team members? And it's something that I do all the time. The folks that I worked with in the restaurants that I got to work in were my family at the time. I loved and adored these folks. And, we did a lot of social things together as well. And that's very true in a lot of restaurants. Do you find from an HR perspective that subtly changes the conversation when we're talking about our family, our restaurant family versus team members? And do you think that there's a line at which an owner or a manager should or shouldn't cross when speaking that way?
I have feelings towards it. I mean, I don't know what Tasha's are, but I can show you mine. I think I like the intent of it, and that's what I'll say, because you are a close knit, right? Like I've worked in retail environments where it's a small group of people and you get to know each other really well. And my concern that lies is there tends to be more tolerance in family. And what I mean by that is we've all been at the dinner table where people say inappropriate things or things that shouldn't be said or fights and arguments, and there's more tolerance in that. There are fine lines that we have to have when we work together. And so my worry is when we call it a family, we allow some of these behaviors that cannot happen in the workplace happen. And so I just urge us to really think about the culture that we're trying to build. Like I like the idea of support systems and helping people, but there are fine lines on things that should not happen in the workplace. So I think having that clear definition and not using the term like family is really important. Because you need to be careful when you're out socially with people. You need to make sure that if you go out socially with them, kind of that's not coming back into the workplace. You can go and have drinks with your manager, but in the office, like there is a different relationship that's there. And so I find that it can really blur and murky the waters there. But it happens all the time. So I don't want to say that it doesn't happen. But Tasha, what are your thoughts on it?
I agree. And then have a different view too. And so I am of the school of, I don't think it really matters as much as what you call the team members, right? Employee, associate, family. I think it's less about what you call them and more about how you guys interact with each other. I think you should always ensure that, if you do have that relationship where you're able to socialize and kind of hang together outside of the restaurant, that's fine. As long as both parties know that when we are in the restaurant, as Nicole said, this is business and our relationship is this. I am the owner, I am the manager, I am the supervisor, and you are the employee. And so we have to respect each other's boundaries in that way. Because I also know that oftentimes some of the team members actually could be actual family members, right? I know that's very common in the restaurant industry. It may be my mom who's in the kitchen, or it may be, a family business overall. And so just being very clear on what are the expectations, what are the rules of engagement, and as long as everybody is operating under those things, then it should not be an issue. But you are the person, as the person who's most senior, the person who has the most authority, you have to be very clear and really secure in yourself to be able to separate so that you are not showing favoritism or given some sort of preferential treatment of someone because they are a either actual family member or my, work family member, and so I'm going to give them a pass.
That makes sense. I think the last few questions that I'm seeing really have to do and go back to the idea of being very consistent, and then also making sure your employees know what the rules are. When I've started at some restaurants, I'm given an employee handbook. Other restaurants, there is no handbook. There is nothing that says what is expected, what will happen if, what is the next step here. And I think that, and I wonder if you agree that, a handbook is a great idea. It doesn't need to be, 17 binders long and go through every single solitary possible thing that could happen. But having a basic code of conduct, having a basic handbook, some rules, what happens if you're late 3 times, or, issues on hygiene, things like that can all be laid out in the handbook. And then you can refer back to that when you're talking to one of your employees. You signed off on this when you started. These are the things that you're doing great. These are a couple of places you're deficient. I think that handbook, like I said, doesn't need to be super complicated. Do you have any recommendations on what would be really important in something like that?
I think all the things that you said is absolutely critical, right, to be included in that. Like, especially like, hey, here's what I'm asking you to do, and here's what's going to happen if those things don't take place. That there are no surprises when consequences have to be issued. But I agree, it doesn't have to be overly formal. I mean, even something as simple as a poster board posted somewhere in a central spot. I've seen in some areas wherever everyone punches in, a time clock or something along those lines is a great space to kind of hang up anything that's the rule of engagement, code of conduct, just to kind of hit the big rocks, so to speak, so that folks kind of know and can see regularly what you're asking them to do. And so it's kind of always top of mind, but can refer back to something later for more detail.
Yeah, I agree with Tasha. And then I think the other is sometimes there's key skills that are really required. And so I know for the restaurant industry, it is really being able to work in a team environment. And so like, what are those, I would say 3, maybe 4 key things that are needed in order to drive a successful restaurant. So maybe teamwork, judgment, problem solving, and communication. And so what does that look like? Because that's what you're going to hold everybody to the same standard towards. And making it very simple that you all can remember versus kind of a really long document to read.
But we are over time at this point. So I wanted to thank all of our listeners, all of our viewers who have stuck with us throughout this entire hour and 15 minutes. I know we have one more slide to share here that had some additional resources. I hope that everybody took note of that. I want to thank Tasha Smith and Nicole Rossel for being here with us today, for all of our friends at Capital One, for sharing this incredibly important information. You can reach out to impact@jamesbeard.org with any other questions. We can certainly direct them on the James Beard side, to get you the best answers possible. We will be here for the 3rd installment of Restaurant Resiliency, presented by Capital One. Next week on the 30th of September, we're going to be talking about marketing and social media. Until then, I hope everyone out there has a wonderful week. You will be able to find this webinar in our archive in just a couple of hours, or certainly by tomorrow. Any last thoughts, Tasha or Nicole, before we head out?
No, I would just say, as long as you kind of just keep top of mind that, hey, people are people, and so you want to treat others as you are treated, that I think is the road to success for any situation.
And thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. And then in the words of Tasha, document, document, document. I think that'll be really important for you all.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you, and to all of you who are out there in the restaurant industry. We are here with you. We are here for you. And I can't wait to see you back again here on the 30th. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.